My mom wants me to get pregnant by her husband. I haven't shared much about my mom before because it's hard to know where to start. She's the kind of person who can turn any situation, no matter how unrelated, into something about her. It's like a superpower, but a toxic one. For most of my adult life, I've kept my distance from her. I'm 26 now, married, and the proud mom of 2 wonderful kids. My life is full and chaotic in the best ways. I've worked really hard to set boundaries with her, but somehow she always finds a way to slip through. Recently, the latest crack has been her upcoming wedding. She's getting married for the 3rd time at 47, and her fiancé is younger than her. I'm not sure how much younger because, honestly, I don't care enough to ask. I've met him a few times at family events, and he immediately gave me weird vibes. He's quiet, which wouldn't be a problem on its own, but he has this unsettling habit of staring at people. Not just glancing, but staring like he's trying to figure you out or uncover your secrets. I didn't like him from the start. Last week, my mom invited me over to catch up, or at least, that's what her message said. I showed my husband the text, and he encouraged me to go. He knows how complicated my relationship with my mom is, but thought maybe she was making an effort. Maybe she was turning over a new leaf. I wasn't so sure, but for the kids' sake, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. When I got there, the atmosphere was off immediately. She didn't offer me anything to drink or eat, even though she and her fiancé were sipping coffee on the couch. They looked like they had been waiting for me, like this was some kind of formal meeting. "Thanks for coming," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She motioned for me to sit, so I took the chair across from them, already feeling uncomfortable. "We've been talking," she started, glancing at her fiancé. He gave her a small nod, like he was following instructions. "About what?" I asked hesitantly. She then launched into a speech about how important family is and how grateful she is that I'm giving her another chance. To be honest, I wasn't really listening. It sounded rehearsed, like she practiced it in front of a mirror. Then she said something that made me pay attention. "You know, I can't have children anymore because of my surgery," she said. I nodded. I already knew this. She had a hysterectomy years ago after some health problems. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I let her continue. "Well," she said, leaning forward slightly, "we've been thinking about ways to make our family complete." I tilted my head, confused. "Okay," I said, unsure. Then she dropped the bomb. "I want you to have a baby for us." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I stared at her, then at her fiancé, expecting him to laugh and say it was a joke, but he didn't. He just stared back at me, his expression unreadable, like he was waiting for me to agree. "What the hell are you talking about?" I finally asked. "It's not that strange," she said, her tone disturbingly casual. "We've thought about it, and it makes perfect sense. You're young, healthy, and you've already had 2 kids. You'd be perfect." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Perfect for what? "You're out of your mind if you think I'm going along with this." She rolled her eyes, just like she used to when I was a kid. She wouldn't stop insisting I do what she wanted. "You're overreacting," she said. "This would be such a beautiful gift to us." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. "Absolutely not." She didn't stop. "You wouldn't even have to do anything after the baby is born. I'd take care of everything. You'd just be helping us out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Helping you out? You want me to get pregnant with your husband's kid and hand it over like a puppy? Are you serious?" Her fiancé finally spoke, his tone calm and calculating. "We could do it naturally or through a doctor. Whatever's easiest for you." I turned to him, disgusted. "You're vile." My mom stood up, trying to placate me. "You're being so dramatic. Women do this all the time. It's not a big deal." I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out without another word and drove straight home. Once I got home, I sat in silence, trying to process what had just happened. How could my own mother think this was okay? What kind of twisted logic had led her believe I would even consider something like this. When my husband got home, I knew I had to tell him. There was no way I could keep something this insane to myself. I sat him down and told him everything. At first, he just stared at me, his jaw clenched. Then he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and said, "We're going over there. Let's just leave it alone," I pleaded. "They're insane. Nothing we say is going to change that." But he was determined. We're going. When we got to her house, he didn't bother knocking. He just walked in. My mom was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like it was any other evening. Her fiancé was at the counter, flipping through a magazine. "We need to talk," my husband said, his voice cold. My mom looked up in surprise. "What's this about?" "You know exactly what this is about," he snapped. She sighed, setting down her knife. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Are you really here to yell at me over something so trivial?" "Trivial?" My husband's voice rose. "You asked my wife to carry your husband's child. That's not trivial. That's disgusting." She waved her hand dismissively. "It's not we're not asking her to do it for free," my mom said. "We would have made sure she was comfortable, and it's not like she'd have to raise the baby." Her fiancé chimed in, his tone maddeningly calm. "This doesn't have to be a big deal. Surrogacy is a generous thing to do for family." My husband turned to him, fists clenched. "Don't even start. You think asking my wife to sleep with you is surrogacy? You're delusional. It doesn't have to be like that," her fiancé replied, leaning back, looking bored. "We could do it medically if that's the issue." "The issue," my husband growled, "is that you even thought this was okay to suggest." My mom crossed her arms, her tone defensive. "I thought you cared about family." "She is my family," my husband shot back, pointing at me. "And I'm here to make sure you and this creep don't pull any more of your sick stunts." Her fiancé stood up, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. "You don't have to talk to her like that." "And what are you going to do about it?" my husband asked, stepping closer. There was a tense silence before my mom finally broke it. "You know what? Maybe it's best if you leave. Clearly, you're not in the right mindset to have a civilized conversation. This is the last conversation we'll ever have," my husband said, grabbing my arm and leading me to the door. As we were leaving, my mom called after us. "You'll regret this. Don't come crawling back when you need help." We didn't look back. That should have been the end of it, but with my mom, nothing is ever truly over. The morning of her wedding, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, there she was, standing on my porch in her wedding dress as if nothing had happened. She stood there, her eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying, but knowing her, it was probably an act. Her makeup was smudged, dark streaks running down her cheeks, and there was a wild, almost unhinged look in her eyes. "You're coming with me," she demanded, her voice sharp and trembling with anger. I stood my ground, gripping the edge of the door. "What are you talking about? I'm not going anywhere." "Yes, you are," she snapped, stepping closer, her voice rising with every word. "You're my daughter, and you're supposed to be at my wedding. You owe me this." I didn't flinch, refusing to be dragged into her chaos. "I don't owe you anything," I said coldly. "You need to leave." Her mouth opened to argue, but before she could say anything, my husband appeared. He came around the corner from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, probably from fixing something. The second he saw her, he stopped dead in his tracks, his expression hardening. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. "She's supposed to be at my wedding." My mom spat, turning to him like she expected him to agree with her. "I'm her mother. She can't just abandon me like this." He dropped the rag on the ground and crossed his arms. "She's not going anywhere with you. You need to leave." "I'm not leaving until she comes with me," she yelled, her face flushing with fury. She crossed her arms tightly, like a stubborn child refusing to move. "Then I'll call the cops," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. Her confidence wavered. She took a small step back, but her rage only grew. "You're ruining my life," she screamed, her voice echoing down the street. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? Everyone's asking where you are. What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them whatever you want," I replied, my tone as flat as I could make it. "I'm not coming." Her fingers shot up, trembling as she pointed at me. "You're dead to me," she hissed. "Do you hear me? Dead." My husband stepped forward, putting himself between us. "That's enough. Leave now, or I'll make you leave." She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and me. Then, with a frustrated scream, she turned and stormed off to her car. The door slammed so hard I thought it might break, and the tires screeched as she sped out of the driveway, leaving dark marks on the pavement. I closed the door and locked it behind her, even though I knew she wouldn't come back. That night, my husband didn't say a word. He just shook his head and went back outside to finish whatever he'd been working on. The rest of the day was eerily quiet, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this wasn't over. My mom has a way of always getting the last word, no matter what it takes. I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. The next day, the voicemail started. "You're a terrible daughter," her voice snarled through the speaker. "You ruined the most important day of my life. I hope you're happy now that everyone knows what a selfish person you are." 6 messages like that, back to back, each one angrier and more spiteful than the last. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just let them pile up and deleted them without listening to the rest. But my silence only seemed to fuel her determination. The text came next. At first, they were short and cutting. "You owe me an apology. Do you even understand what you've done to me?" When I ignored those 2, she switched tactics. A few days later, I found an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter, 2 pages long. The first half was a tirade accusing me of being ungrateful, disrespectful, and heartless. She went on about how much she'd sacrificed for me, how she'd always been there for me as a mother, and how I was throwing it all back in her face. But the second half was worse. She brought up the baby arrangement again, the same insane idea she'd been pushing for months. She even wrote out a list of reasons why it would benefit everyone, as if it were some kind of business proposal. I couldn't read another word. I tore the letter into pieces and threw it in the trash. No matter what I did, it felt like she was everywhere. Her words echoed in my head, and the walls of my home felt like they weren't enough to keep her out. A few days later, I went grocery shopping, hoping to escape the suffocating tension. But even there, she found me. I was in the produce section, comparing prices on apples, when I spotted her. My stomach sank. She saw me too, and before I could react, she was striding toward me with a determined look on her face. "Finally," she spoke, her tone eerily cheerful. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," I replied, turning to walk away. But she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't you dare walk away from me," she hissed. She hissed, and I yanked my arm free, glaring at her. "Don't touch me." She ignored my words, her voice rising. "Do you know how many people asked me where you were? How do you think it felt to stand there making excuses for you while everyone looked at me like I was the bad guy?" "I don't care," I said coldly. "You don't get to guilt-trip me after everything you've done." Her face twisted with anger as she leaned in. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You're going to regret this. You think you're so smart, but you're just a spoiled little brat who doesn't know how good she's had it." I didn't bother responding. I left my cart behind and walked out of the store, my hands trembling. When I got home, I told my husband what had happened. He was furious. "We're getting a restraining order," he said. I wasn't sure if it was worth the effort, but after what happened next, I knew he was right. That evening, she showed up at our house again. This time, she didn't knock. She stood outside, yelling for me to come out and talk to her. I didn't respond. I stayed inside, clutching my phone as my husband called the police. By the time they arrived, she was gone, but the experience was enough to shake me. I realized I couldn't ignore this anymore. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer to start the process. I had to provide evidence of her harassment, which meant digging up voicemails, texts, and even that awful letter she'd sent. It wasn't easy. Reliving all of it felt like opening old wounds, but eventually, the restraining order was granted. She was no longer allowed to come near me, my family, or my home. For a while, things were quiet. Then I heard through the grapevine that her marriage wasn't going well. She and her new husband were trying to start fresh in another state. It didn't surprise me. Her relationships always seemed to crumble under the weight of her manipulation and control. As for me, I've officially cut her out of my life. I blocked her number, deleted her from social media, and told the rest of my family not to contact me about her. It hasn't been easy. Some days, I still hear her voice in my head, accusing me, blaming me. But for the first time in years, I feel like I can finally breathe. My family, my real family, my husband and kids, are all that matter to me now. I'll do whatever it takes to protect them from her insanity. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.